Hello everyone, I'm Joe from Scarecrow Joe's Studio, and if you've been watching all the segments on the tutorial on how to create your own paper mache gargoyle, we are in the home stretch. This is the very last segment, and it's going to be all on painting and sealing your gargoyle. And as you can see, I already started painting. I based him out in a black paint. I'll show you what I used. I had two types of black paint, spray paint. I chose to use a spray paint instead of a can of paint and trying to paint all of these things with a paintbrush, because there's so many little like crevices, and it would be very difficult to get inside in the mouth and some of these other areas under the wings here. So I chose spray paint, and I suggest that you do the same. And depending on how large your sculpture is, you might need 2 cans, you might need 3 cans. I mean, it really depends. But you do want to get an even coat on the entire gargoyle, including the bottom of it, the base. So I did that off camera. I just wanted to show you. I had 2 types of black spray paint on hand. I had a paint and primer, and this is a satin enamel, and this is interior and exterior spray paint. And then I also had a paint and primer, but this was an ultimate ultra matte finish. I chose the satin enamel because of the enamel content in the paint. And you know, my thinking, my rationality on using this type of paint over the matte without the enamel in it is that it's going to help protect it from moisture. However, because it's an enamel and it's a satin, I do not believe that you could get an enamel in a matte, but I could be wrong. But because I use this type here, it came out very shiny because of the enamel in that paint. But that's not a big deal, because what we're going to do next is I'm going to dry brush on darker gray paint, and it's going to knock down some of the shininess on the black. Now, just as a word of caution, before you start applying any paint whatsoever, make sure that your gargoyle sculpture, the paper mache clay, is thoroughly dry. You don't want to have any moisture in the clay at all. So it could take several days in front of a fan for it to dry completely, and that's really going to depend on how thick you have built up your areas with that paper mache clay. If you have very thick amounts in certain areas, it's going to take a little bit longer, but you do want to make sure that your sculpture is thoroughly and completely dry before starting the paint process. Now, when you go and move forward after your sculpture is dry, with the spray paint, make sure you have a thorough coating of the spray paint on your entire sculpture, like I said before, including the bottom. And you may need to do 2 coats. It really depends on, again, how large your sculpture is and what kind of details you need to spray paint over. So keep that in mind. But you do want to have the same amount of spray paint, an even amount on the entire surface of your gargoyle. And you also want to make sure that you're spraying spray paint up underneath his chin area and inside the mouth area and the eyes where those eye openings are as well. Alright, on that note, let's get dry brushing on the gray. Okay, so what I have done here is I have mixed up in a little paper bowl some gray paint. It's not very light, but it's also not very dark either. I'm going to go with this for now, and if I need to lighten the paint or darken some of the areas, I'll go ahead and mix up a darker or a lighter gray paint. So all I've used for that is simple acrylic craft paint, and that's really all that you need, a black and a white, to mix up gray. The other thing that you're going to want is either some shop towels or some paper towels, so that you could use that to knock off some of the paint built up on your paintbrush before applying the paint. That is part of the dry brush technique. Most of you probably are very familiar with the dry brushing technique, especially if you watch some of my other tutorials where I always finish by showing you how to paint, or what I do to paint my particular sculptures. So what I'm going to do here, and this is what I always do, is I start on the back. I like to start on the back of the sculpture and down towards the bottom, just to see what the paint is going to look like. I didn't dry brush on any kind of white at all on the sculpture, and I normally do dry brush on some white, but I'm going to go straight with the gray. Now I use the same brush. This is a 1-inch chip brush, and I use the same brush to mix this paint, so there's quite a lot of paint on my brush. I don't want all that paint on there, so I'm gonna knock quite a bit of it off, like most of it. You want it to be, well, a dry brush. And again, I'm going to start right down here on the bottom. I'm going to just go in very lightly and start on the bottom of the base here. And already my first thought is that this gray may be a little too light. Maybe I should have went with a darker gray to begin with, but we'll see how it looks after this paint dries. If you get to a point where I just did right there, where I had just way too much paint on my brush, you could take your just take your piece of paper towel or a cloth and wipe some of that off. But this is another reason why I start on the bottom and on the back. I am going to just go ahead and carry on with this color, because acrylic paint, when it dries, it doesn't dry to the color that it is when it's wet. So I'm just going to carry on with this paint here and dry brush. I'm not really going in and hitting the areas in between, like these muscle areas here. I'm not hitting them very hard. It's very light, because for the most part I want it to just kind of fade to that darker color. So any of those recessed areas in there, that's what I'm doing. I just want it to fade to that dark black. And as you can see, it's picking up this dry brush technique with this gray paint, or if you're using a white paint, any paint color that you're using, any color paint that you're using over a darker color, it's going to bring out all of that texture. So you can see where I put in all of that texture in the spine ridge. Just by the dry brush technique, it's bringing out all of that texture, is just popping through. Alright, so I pretty much dry brushed the back of him here. Left the recessed areas with a little less of the dry brush gray paint on there, because I want it to be darker in those recessed areas. And I'm going to go ahead and just start on the wings, the back of the wings here. And as you can see, it is starting to knock down some of that shiny black enamel spray paint on this thing. Go heavier on the areas with the dry brush that you want to stand out a little bit more. Alright, I'm just going to carry on and keep dry brushing the back here of these wings. Alright, so I've got the back here pretty much done. I did the back of the wings and came over into the side of the wings a little bit. I did the inside, tried to get the inside a little bit here. With the curled parts of these wings, I'm really not going to be able to get in there and do any dry brushing. That's fine. I could just let those areas fade to black. But right now I'm going to move on to the top of his head here. Alright, so basically same thing. The top of the sculpture here, some of it in the recessed areas, I'm just going to go ahead, let that fade to a darker color. With this paper mache clay that I use, using the cellulose fiber insulation as the paper product, it's great for this type of texture for like stone, because it really brings out all of that into your piece. So all of that effort that I put into putting in that texture into that clay is really coming and shining through on this piece using the dry brush technique. So I just flipped him around here to continue on with the top of his head. Alright, so the top of the head is dry brushed. I started on the front of the face here. I'm not going to really put any kind of dry brush in the ears, inside the ears here. I just want to kind of let those fade to black. Not really going to press in my brush in these recessed areas either, so I'm just going to go ahead and carry on. I do want to hit the eyes so that those stand out. So anything that you really want to stand out, that's what you're going to dry brush. And you may want to dry brush on just a little bit more than, you know, hitting it light. But you can always go, and what I suggest is you always, with dry brushing, go light on the dry brush at first, because you could always go back and dry brush over some of those areas that you want to highlight even more. So I'm letting the eye sockets fade to black, the inside of the nostrils fade to black, some of these areas in here fade to black, and I'm just concentrating on hitting anything that I want to highlight, including the tongue and the teeth. So now I'm just going to carry on, complete the dry brush with this gray on the entire sculpture, but I'll do this in you know, like a fast frame motion, so that you could still see what I'm doing if you're interested in watching, and if not, you could just fast forward through the whole thing. Well, there you have it. That's the dry brushing technique. I really made sure the areas that I wanted to highlight the most and bring those features out, like the talons on the toes here, the teeth, some of the other areas, I hit those areas a little bit more heavily with the dry brush. But again, what I do suggest is, you know, get your layer of dry brush on there, whatever paint color that you choose, and then let it dry, and then you can go back after it dries, because the coloration is going to change, especially if you're using acrylic craft paint or any kind of acrylic paint. When it dries, the color is not going to look the same as it when it looks like when it's wet. So that's what I'm going to do. Before I do anything else, I want to make sure that this is dry, and then I'm going to take it out. into the sunlight, and that's another thing that I recommend. Look at it in different types of lighting. For now, we're pretty much done, and then after this dries, I'll take a look at it. We'll come back and I'll either do more dry brushing, or we'll carry on with sealing this to protect it even more from any kind of moisture. Alright, so I let him sit to dry pretty much overnight. And I do like, in this lighting for my studio, it's very bright. So it does make this gargoyle look a lot lighter than it actually is. So I do like the gray. It is sort of a lighter gray. It's not all that dark, but I really like it. The only things that I want to do here is, in some of these raised areas, I do want to go in, and this is just a smaller diameter of an artist brush, and with that gray paint that I dry brushed on, just in some of these areas where I built up that clay and I want them to stand out a bit more, I'm just going in with that gray paint and sort of just hitting them a little bit more to bring out that definition and the depth. Alright, so I just went in and just highlighted a little bit more of those raised areas where I want them to stand out a little bit more, and let the rest kind of fall a bit more in shadow. So this is how he looks. Turn him for you. This technique, if you recall, I used the toilet paper method, dipped in the paste, and it added a little bit more interest to this piece, I think, with making it look like maybe there's some bony structure in his feet, and on this side as well. So I really like the way that that came out. Turn him this way so you can see. And the back of the wings here, and the back of him. Alright, I'm going to let this dry. I'm going to give it maybe an hour, and then the next thing and the final thing that I'm going to do with this guy is to seal him with some spar urethane. This happens to be a Minwax brand, and it's for indoor or outdoor use. It's going to protect it against moisture and sunlight just by sealing it. And it's a clear satin. These come in different variations. I mean, you can get a clear satin and you can get like a high gloss. Even though this is satin, once it's sprayed on there and dries, there's going to be a shine to it. So, you know, there's really no way around that, but by using this, you will have a shine to your piece. But I think it's fine, especially for gargoyles and things like that, because it kind of gives it the impression or the look that maybe it's been sitting out in some rain. And when you put this in on your yard display, and you have a little fog machine, you know, you got some fog around it, if it's up on a column or even down lower, you have some fog around it, and you put a colored spotlight on it. It looks really cool. Alright guys, well, it's about dusk. I have my spotlight on my finished gargoyle here. Right now I have it on a red color. He looks kind of cool. So I'm going to just give you a closer look at him. This is the green. That looks pretty cool. I really like that. And this is kind of a bluish color, so that's kind of cool too. So he came out really well. I'm very happy with him. This year he's going to be displayed in our little yard haunt that we're going to do on Halloween, pretty much just for people around our community and our neighborhood. So very happy with him. And guys, on that note, this is a wrap for the final segment of the paper mache gargoyle tutorial. We have finished up the paint. It was a long road. A lot of work went into this, a lot of work, a lot of effort. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you for subscribing. If you have not already subscribed, please consider doing so. And I will catch you in the next one.